Thank you, everyone, for having me. For those of you that know me, I've been involved at the Fellowship Council for several decades now. I know I'm aging myself, but this society is so dear to me. And I just really want to thank all of you for being here today, because you are what makes fellowship training happen, each and every one of you. And I just want to shout out to Maria, who's in the audience today, who's just amazing and keeps this society running. So without much ado, I also want to thank Anne and Mike for allowing me to speak today as I come to the end of my term on the board and things like that. I'll continue to have a voice, though. Hard to shut up. So they asked me to speak about the financial viability of the fellowship training year, and I wanted to go through this with a few things. So first of all, I have 3 disclosures, none of which are relevant to this session. And as I've said with my other talks, I'm happy to entertain any more disclosures. So overview, I'd like to just talk to you about my perspective. I think it's always useful to know where somebody's come from when they give a talk, because I think it provides some degree of implicit bias also from where they're coming from, etc. I think it's also important to talk about the different types of funding that are utilized by different fellowships. And then we'll look at some of the data that Danny Scott and the Fellowship Council found with regard to funding. And then kind of some things about my little tips about how I think you can ensure that you and your program are valuable. So my perspective, the first thing is I'm in like old-fashioned traditional private practice. I mean, it doesn't really exist much anymore. There are 3 of us in the group, and we are based on billing and collection. We're not employed. We're really traditional private practice, which is really interesting, because the other day I was talking to one of our fellows about how billing and collection occurs, and he started talking about our views, and I said, having been in academics, that's how the academic model works, but for us it's all about billing and collections, right? It doesn't matter what you do. At the end of the day, that's what runs the practice. Now again, it's not about money, but it's about paying the folks that you have to pay. I have been in academics, which provides a really nice perspective, I think, and I've got to see the challenges of both. So what is a program? And you all do this, but I kind of think that this is a nice way to think about things. The stool has to have at least 3 legs: clinical practice, education, and research. So everyone in this group does all 3 of those, because they're actually required of you from the Fellowship Council. The research leg is probably the most wobbly in the private practice arena, but it can be bolstered. And for example, Sharona Ross and Alex Rosemurgy have taught me so much about setting that up. So 2 fellowship programs at our institution. One is an HBB program. We were number 7, believe it or not, in the country in 2006. And we started an advanced GI program. And I kind of decided on the advanced GI moniker for this because we do a lot of robotics, but we also do a lot of big old-time open cases too, with a lot of oncology GI-wise. We have many trainees on site: fellows, residents, PA students, MD students, and DO students. And you have to kind of want that, because there wasn't a good MD school for me to partner with in our local area. And so I started out with a fantastic osteopathic school. The students were fantastic, and that's been a great relationship over the years. This is our hospital, which is really, it looks amazing, actually. It's about 250 beds if you count labor and delivery. And when I moved up there from the downtown location, actually Kara's in the audience over here is one of our previous trainees, they'd never done anything like this before, and it was really amazing. The one nice thing was they didn't have trauma or transplant, so I never get bumped for those cases, which is wonderful. And, it's a beautiful facility. And this is what the ORs look like, which is amazing. So how do you convince the administration that it's worth having a training program in a private environment? We're used to this in academics, right? Because it's part of your core, although all of you in academic practices also know that it's not always part of everyone's core, right? There's some great educators, and there's some that really need some help in learning how to do this. But nothing can happen without volume. So those three legs to the stool, the clinical piece drives everything. So you've got to have volume, right? And this, so the reason I brought up this background was, how do you make yourself valuable enough to the system to ensure that they have buy-in to fellowship training? Well, this was the slide that Danny's group came up with when they did their survey. It just came out in May, and this is what the total cost of a fellow is, somewhere between 107 and 110, looking at the Fellowship Council survey compared to the FSF data, and that's including malpractice, benefits, etc. And so as we think about models of funding, basically they fall into three buckets, right? You either need to have grant funding of some kind, and the FSF provides some funding that way. You can do philanthropic funds, and I think you should not discount this, because you have a lot of very grateful patients in whatever circumstance you are in. And let me tell you, as I've got further along in time, I hate to ask for money for myself, but I'm actually pretty good at asking for money for others. So don't be afraid to pitch this, because, you know, for a lot of folks, this is a tax write-off, and they feel good about actually making a difference. The system can pay for the fellow, and actually that is how our fellows are funded. We're very fortunate, but I'm going to tell you why the system ended up doing that. And then the last bucket is really Bill as an assistant, and you can have two ways of doing this. One is part of the physician practice, or part of the hospital as an employee. So you all know, unfortunately, that the funding from the FSF has decreased over time, much because of, you know, the changes with industry, etc. And so it is reality, and I actually applaud the FSF for the work that they're doing. And another plug to what Mike Brunt said just a little bit ago, please go by and say hello and thank you, because most of our fellowships that have received money are funded through industry funding through the FSF. Philanthropic funding, so I said the grateful patient, right? So those are, you know, real dollars that are available over there. You can get things, you know, endowed chairs, etc. in academic practice. You can do the same type of thing for fellowship training, and certainly the GI fellowships at our home institution are run through philanthropic funds. There are some monies available through state funding that obviously has to go through a foundation and such in order to fund education, and then obviously industry. And this is an evolving area as we look at industry-related funding. One of the things that we found as we actually launched a research fellowship was actually there was a fair amount of funding out there unrestricted for specific research-based projects. So the system, in our case, the system pays for the fellowship, and you have to see this is what we have, but you've got to convince the system that the program is worth it, and convince the system that the fellows add value. And unfortunately, the reality is you've got to convince the system that the alternative ways of funding things may not be cheaper. So how do you know the value? Well, the first thing, and HCA has made no bones about this, they've started 500 new GME spots in North Texas. They clearly want to keep those trainees within the system to generate additional revenue. And you can make that case. You can actually draw a straight line to that and increase revenue. And that should be part of your financial plan as you go to your leadership. In our environment, they do not understand that the program gets better recognized through fellowship training. They don't understand that, like, a patient of, you know, Henry Pitts, who's in Dallas, generates a call from Henry to me to say, can they show up, because he knows me through training. They don't get that. And also they don't understand how education can benefit the system, even though most of our slides have Methodist on it. So you're the biggest bargaining card. You, yourself, are the biggest reason that they would want to do this. So let's talk about this, right? And we've looked at this. What does our program do for them? Well, guess what? An MRI is a great source of income. not only for you, but for the radiologists, for the institution. I mean, they're high dollar scans, and we order them like, every 3 months on these patients that we follow, right? And they're not just MRIs, they're MRI with EOVIST, which is a higher dollar amount. Pathology, they love us for the EUSs, they love us for the ESDs, they love us for all of this stuff, right? I don't have any inclination that they love me, they love the business that's coming from it. Inpatient revenue, those DRG codes for HPB, for example, are fantastic. And then cardiology income. So every patient gets some sort of workup, it seems, especially in my disasters that I deal with. Just to give an example, a guy with one leg who has a GE junction cancer who comes to see me after chemoradiation and, oh, by the way, has reversible defects everywhere that are non-stentable. So he got his cabbage today with me having to do his esophagectomy. Oh, to boot, he's got a sleeve. So I don't even have a conduit to use for this guy. So that's my life. So this is what we saw, 20% growth in volume in each of these areas with our program moving to this location. So the fellowship salary compared to the millions that your system is generating off you is nothing. So it's easiest, but it's at a cost, right? So if they're employed by the system, they're a system employee, they're a little bit, the fellow is not as much within your scope of practice and control, but the benefits are good in general, especially when you look at it as being as billed within your private practice. So let's talk about that a little bit, because this was interesting to me that not a lot of people knew about the private practice and the fact that, number one, you've got to be fully licensed. Med mal coverage has to include either a tail or be occurrence-based and credentialed fully. And my only concern when I thought about this was, am I going to be like, oh, they're fully on staff, our fellows, they can be independent, and this consultant, I don't maybe need to be as involved. I don't know. For me, it works best to have them there as truly trainees. But the other side of it is really, I love the idea of our fellows taking general surgery call to some degree, because I do think that independence is important. So again, with us, you've got to buy a new platform, you've got to pay the mal, pay salary, benefits, etc. And it does affect your income if you're in private practice. So employed, as I said, easier, minimal effect. So in summary, be valuable, be financially productive, i.e. do the volume. Don't take a loss if you're in private practice, because it really is important that you can pay your employees and generate income for all those around you. You should be the one that they're looking upon as the major generation source. But really that means be a good doctor, be a good educator, and do the right thing. Thank you so much.